All right, tonight is Tech Talk with John Taylor from Sterling Adaptives. Thank you so much, John, for being here tonight. And John, you're going to be doing a demo for all of us about tactile graphics with TactileView. So take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me, number one. This is really cool. I'm excited. So just to give you a real brief introduction to myself, I'm John Taylor with Sterling Adaptives. One of the things I've been doing for years, well, I've been in the industry for about 9 years now, and my background is all Braille embossers and tactile graphics. That's kind of what I do, and I've been all around the country training and showing especially this piece of software that I'm going to show you here tonight. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. I'm going to switch over here. Okay. Let me just rearrange that. All right, so this is TactileView. So what TactileView is essentially is a tactile graphics creation suite. Now, just to kind of a little bit information about TactileView, it's made by a little company out of the Netherlands called Thinkable. And they make just pretty much just this software here. And now, the neat thing about TactileView is, well, there's a couple things. Number one, I think it's the most powerful tactile graphics tool that I've personally seen. The other thing is since it's made by a third-party company, it has no direct ties to any of the Braille embosser companies. You will find most of the major manufacturers kind of have their own little graphics suite, and usually they're not super powerful, but you get it for free together with the embosser. So, but the problem with those is they really limit you to one particular Braille embosser, or at least that company's only that company's models. So with this, you can pretty much use any mainstream embossers. That can include the View Plus, those are the Tiger folks, if you heard Tiger Braille embossers, Index Braille embossers, the classic enabling Romeo and Juliet's. Pretty much all those mainstream embossers can work together with this software. So the nice thing about that is if you're working across districts, different districts have different embossers, this program will work together with all of them. So you don't have to have separate programs and be kind of trying to convert things and so on and so forth. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through 100% of everything that TactileView does, but what I'm going to go through is kind of most of the basic tools and show you guys kind of how it works and how you can use it to more efficiently and easily create tactile graphics to then be embossed on Braille embossers or be printed also to work with thermoform machines. Okay, so starting out here, there is a little kind of toolbar across the top, and I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. This is kind of the standard kind of things that you would find, like create a new document, open a document, save a document. This is kind of a neat feature. There's a little icon that looks like 3 books in a line, and this would open up TactileView's online tactile graphic catalog. And I'm just going to show you this real briefly here. This takes you online to TactileView's website, and on here there is a catalog of over, currently there is 4,288 tactile graphics on here, and they break it down by category as well. So we have things like animal, architecture, art, astronomy, biology, cards, education, food, games, history, movies, and so on and so forth. So you can really kind of drill down for kind of whatever you're looking for. So let's say, for example, I want to look for some animals. If I click on that, it'll break it down even further into some kind of subcategories. Let me zoom in on that just a touch. So we have like at the farm, beasts of prey, birds, fish, so on and so forth. So let's say we want to find some farm animals, for example. If I go to at the farm, there's a little number at the end that tells you how many tactile graphics are in the catalog. And we have cows, sheep, goats, horses, rabbits, pigs, chickens, kind of anything that you want. And there's a little green download arrow below it. So not only can you kind of break it down by category and find any sort of tactile graphic that you want, but you can also do a keyword search up at the top as well and search for something you might be looking for. So this is a big repository of tactile graphics. All of these are online, free for anyone to use. Now, some of these are just kind of the basics. They're more of a good starting point. They aren't necessarily a finished tactile graphic. Maybe you want to add some Braille labels or make some changes of your own. But all of these are free for anybody who's using TactileView to download and use and create and make their own from it and then emboss. Not only that, but you can also create designs yourself, anybody using TactileView, and you can upload those to the catalog if you think those may be helpful to others as well. So I just want to briefly show that because I think that's a really valuable feature. There is some other kind of tactile graphic kind of online databases that you can go get free tactile graphics from, like the APH has a tactile graphics library. The only problem with that is those are mostly PDFs, and I'll show you how to get PDFs into TactileView should you want to do that, but PDFs don't work real great with a lot of embossers for Braille embossing, but we'll go into that a little bit more in detail later on. Okay, so moving on, we have a compose map tool. This is another thing that you can go online and use. You can type in a country, a continent, a state, even down to city or even street view. And this little compose map tool help you build a map. You may need to enter some Braille labels and things like that, touch it up just a touch bit, but at least help you create the basics of creating a tactile graphic for a map. In addition to that, you can also scan in using a flatbed scanner. There's an icon just for this. If you have a scanner plugged into your computer, you can scan in images and use those in here. We'll go into more detail about bringing in images later on, but that is one of the things you can do. You can also take a picture with a webcam or document camera if you have one of those connected to your computer. Then we have some basic controls. There's keyboard shortcuts for all these as well, but there's undo, delete, cut, copy, paste, and there's also an alternative right-click button. There's those controls. There's also the standard keyboard controls like Control C to copy, Control V to paste, Control X to cut, things like that. So, but they have buttons for those along the top. There's also a print icon, print preview, some links to TactileView's weblog and website. There's a little icon that looks like a light bulb, and that one will take you on and show you some TactileView example files. Moving on here, we have a little icon that looks like a Braille label, and this is where you can find your Braille table and choose whatever type of Braille table that you want. So there's a little drop down here, and you can choose the Braille table of your choice. So it's named a little bit funny. So EN, that stands for English, UEB would be UEB, and G2 stands for grade 2. So that was my choice in this particular case. I'm using UEB grade 2. I could also do UEB math if I wanted to, or some other Braille table of my choosing. I'm gonna go ahead and stick with UEB grade 2 for this example though. There's also a little languages drop-down icon, and you can switch the program to a different language if you want. There's some page formatting options, so you can choose between portrait and landscape by simply clicking that button. There's also some design format and resolution options, which is kind of like you can choose your page size here. If you want to get more advanced, you can even choose the DPI. That gets a little more advanced, to be honest with you. TactileView does a good job of automatically choosing the DPI for you based off the Braille embosser that you have, so don't really even have to worry about that too much. But you can also add margins if you want to create custom paper sizes and things like that within here as well. So currently what I have is I have selected 11.5 by 11 inch sheet of paper as my design or work area, and we'll use that kind of as our example, but you could choose 8.5 by 11 or whatever paper size that you may be working with as well. Moving on here, we have a couple different grid patterns. Again, these are just icons along the top toolbar. So one of our grid patterns is a Braille pattern. So it's real light green, so it may be a little hard to see on screen, but there's a light green grid pattern on here. And this is just on screen for your benefit to keep things visually aligned while creating your tactile graphics. So the Braille pattern, each grid box is the size of one 6-dot or full 6-dot Braille cell. So that's one grid pattern I'm choosing. The next grid pattern is a measurements grid. And if I just click on the next icon over, that's a measurements grid. And this one I currently have set to inches, but you could also choose a different unit of measurements. But it breaks it down into larger 1-inch squares and then into smaller 1/4-inch squares within that as well. So again, these are just grids that you can turn on to kind of help you keep things aligned as you're working. Or if you simply click on one of the two grid types again, it will turn off the grid as well. So you can kind of choose there. Next, you have the next two icons are for line view and dot view. So I'm going to draw something out real quick just to give you an example of what this looks like. So I just drew out a simple circle, and currently it looks like on screen that circle is a solid line. Now I'm designing this this graphic to be embossed out on a Braille embosser. So this solid line view, kind of the print view, if you will, doesn't really give me a good accurate representation of what this is going to look like when it's embossed out on a Braille embosser, because a Braille embosser will essentially be trying to make a uniform solid line, but with individual Braille dots. So one option we have here is to look at the dot view instead. And if I look at that, we now see that circle represented by Braille dots. And so this gives you kind of actually a printer accurate rendering of your Braille dot placement before you actually emboss out your tactile graphic. And this is particularly useful because a lot of times when you're designing tactile graphics to be embossed out in print, it doesn't always emboss in quite how you envision it in Braille. The main reason for that is simply because it's hard to kind of break it down to Braille DPI versus print DPI, if that's going to make any sense. Essentially, a Braille dot is a lot thicker than a thin line is. But even if you drew out a thin line, it's still represented by a full, a normal size Braille dot. So essentially, if you have a thicker line, you don't know quite sometimes when it turns into 2 Braille dots wide, or if you have a thinner line, you're not sure exactly what that looks like in Braille. So having this Braille view here is really helpful for checking your work or even working within this mode to create your tactile graphics, and it gives you a better idea of how that's going to be embossed out. Because sometimes otherwise, if you're just designing in print, you emboss it out and you're like, ooh, that doesn't look all that great, and if it came out in Braille, and you have to go back, make some changes, and then try it again. A little bit of guess and check. This eliminates that guess and check factor, which is really, really awesome. So you can work fully in either mode. You can work in the line view mode, which shows everything as solid lines, or in the dot view mode. My preference is to work in line view and then switch over before I emboss to check my work in the dot view. That's just my preference, but you can work fully in either mode. It doesn't matter. So you'll be seeing me working in the line view primarily and going over from time to time to check my work in the Braille view. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bump out my magnification just a little bit. The next icon is an Explore mode. I'm not going to go real too deep into this Explore mode, but real briefly, I'm just going to tell you what this is about. So TactileView, this program, is one piece in a suite of products that you can get. You can get just the software on its own, which is what I'm going to recommend for a lot of people, but there are some other pieces to it. And one of those pieces is called the audio reading system. And what it allows you to do is design tactile graphics within this software here, the TactileView software, and then assign audio labels to it. And then you can actually plug in something they call the TactiPad or audio reading system. And it has one of those digital pens. It's kind of like, they got a little bit popular for a while. They were those kind of digital pens that were like Bluetooth, and you could write and take notes with it, and it would digitally draw it on your cell phone or computer at the same time. So it uses a pen like that, and it has a sensor, and it can tell where you are on the embossed tactile graphic as you explore it. And whenever you click the pen on a part of the tactile graphic that has an audio label that you attach to it in the software, it will then play that audio label back. So this allows you, if you want to get this extra piece to go with it, allows you to add audio labels to your tactile graphic and get a kind of another element or another layer of information out of your graphics. For example, think of when creating a picture or tactile graphic of a bird. You could actually attach an MP3 file to the bird, so when the bird was clicked on with that digital pen, it could play back an audio file of birds chirping. Or that could be something that you've written in text as well, and you could use as a voice synthesizer to speak it aloud to you. For example, I could make it so that when I click on this circle here, it reads me back circle using a voice synthesizer on your computer. So that's what the Explore mode is for. It's for when you've created these graphics with audio labels and you're using it together with the audio reading system to play back those audio labels. So there's going to be a couple other times I might mention that just because there's going to be a feature kind of related to it. But for the most part, we'll skip over that. If you have questions later on, feel free to ask me more about the audio reading system part of tactile graphics. Primarily, we're just going to focus on creating just standard graphics for embossing out Braille embossers. So last couple icons here are just simply zoom in, zoom out icons. These look just like little magnifying glasses with a plus or minus next to them, and that's just so you can zoom in and out on the graphic. Or there's one final one which shows the full page with a little magnifying icon, and that will zoom you out so you can see the full page at one time. So that's kind of the little top toolbar. It's mostly kind of just standard options, some grid patterns, things like that. Where the real magic happens, if you will, is over here on the left-hand side, this toolbar here. Before I move on to this toolbar, there is one little thing I want to mention. Over at the end of the top toolbar, you notice it says TactileView 1, and this is actually a tab, and you can have multiple documents open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the Create a New Document button. And when I do that, you'll see up here in the upper right-hand corner, now it says TactileView 1 and TactileView 2. And these are two separate documents that I have open at the same time, and I can simply click on those to switch back and forth between them. This is fantastic if you have If you have graphics that you're switching back and forth between, maybe you have created a tactile graph in the past and you want to use some elements from that design in your new design you're working on, so you can copy and paste back and forth, or even just have multiple documents open that you're working on or printing at the same time. So I think that's kind of nifty. So back over here to the left-hand toolbar, this is where all your tools are for creating your tactile graphics. Now, before I get too in-depth into all these tools, I'm just going to mention this, not go too deep into it. But up at the top, there's your standard, file, design, edit, view, those kind of menus up at the top. And those menus can also be used together with a screen reader to do some drawing accessibly. Now, how you would do that is, for example, rather than clicking on like the line tool or something like that on the toolbar, you could go to drawing tools and you could go down to draw straight line. And rather than clicking and dragging out with your mouse pointer, using a screen reader, it'll open up a little window and allow you to accessibly, again with a screen reader, type in the placement and the size of whatever drawing element you're trying to put in. So it starts by asking you, where do you want the starting position of this object you're putting in to be? And it asks you in relation to the left edge and the top edge. So I could say I want this straight line that I'm going to draw to be 1 inch in from the left edge. I can tab over. I want to be 1 inch in from the top edge as well. Tab again. And I can either choose the position of the last point and have it draw from one position to the next, or I can go down simply to the length, and I could say I want this to be a 3-inch long line. I tab to OK, press enter, and there we go. It drew a 3-inch long line, starting 1 inch in from the left and 1 inch in from the top. Now, I didn't choose my last position. Instead of choosing the last position of the last point, I chose to put it at an angle. I think it was a 223-degree angle from where it started. So that's where it drew out that line for me. But you can actually be very precise and do this together with a screen reader, as long as you kind of are spatially aware of where you're placing things, so you aren't kind of putting stuff on top of each other. Anyway, the reason I mention this is because, to my knowledge, there is no other tactile graphics or drawing tool that you can use accessibly with a screen reader. They simply just don't make them, to my knowledge. So the fact that you can come in here with a screen reader and actually use any of the drawing tools in here to create your own tactile graphics as a visually impaired person, I think is pretty amazing. As a matter of fact, the CEO of the company that makes this particular product, TactileView, is a visually impaired gentleman himself, and he designed it because he wanted to be able to create graphics. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you could do in the background. So I just kind of wanted to mention that real quick, because a lot of what I'm going to show you using the icons on the toolbar on the left-hand side and just simply clicking and dragging with my mouse can also be done through these menu systems up here using a screen reader and the placement tools instead. So, all right, so let's go ahead and move on to the actual tools now. So starting at the top of the toolbar, just for size, you notice I kind of have two toolbars and they're overlapping a little bit. If you have a bigger screen, I kind of blew mine up a little bit just for the sake of the video. But I have two toolbars here, and usually they're stacked again if you have a bigger screen, but that's okay. So starting at the top toolbar here, we have our text label tool. And so this is used for labeling your tactile graphic. And when I click on it, you'll notice there's a little submenu that pops up. And in this submenu, you have 3 different options for Braille labeling. So the first option, you click on that, and then you click wherever on your document you want to place your Braille label. So if I click here, it brings up, and I can simply now type on my keyboard. So what I wrote is, this is a test, and I simply type this out, T-H-I-S-I-S-A-T-E-S-T, test. And if you notice, or if you're good at reading Braille or sight reading Braille, you notice that it actually auto-contracted for me on the fly as I typed. Since I had UEB grade 2, it translated for me as I typed into UEB grade 2, and now here's a Braille label that says this is a test. Now with this Braille label, I can pick it up and I can move it and place it anywhere on my document I want. So that's the first way of adding Braille labels to kind of label any sort of tactile graphic that you're making. If I click on the Braille label tool again, I go down to the second option here. This one is 6-key entry. Works pretty much the same way, except I click on it, I can click again wherever I want to place my Braille label. And then using FDS and JKL as your 6-dot Braille cell, essentially F would be .1, D would be .2, S would be .3, J.4, K.5, L.6. You can do 6-key entry. Now, I'm just going to do some full Braille cells instead of embarrassing myself with my terrible 6-key entry skills here. But you get the point. It allows you to 6-key in any sort of Braille you want. This can be text, this can be math, whatever you want, you can simply 6-key it in. So that is your second way to Braille label. your tactile graphics. Now the third way, if I click on the text label tool again and click on the third option here, this is using math input from a program called MathType. Now, some of you may have heard of MathType before. MathType, essentially what it is it's a equation building software. It's actually a mainstream program that's used by teachers, math professors, and things like that to quickly and easily create complex math equations that are properly formatted. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up MathType, and they have a free trial if you want to try it out. So I open up MathType, and here it is. It's just a little window that you can create any sort of math equation that you want. So I'm just going to write some random math, and I'll just kind of show you a few of the tools. So I'll just do something simple like x to the second. I'm going to click on some of these options here. They have a little thing that does I forget what it's called. Like, it's not subscript. I think it's postscript or something like that. Anyway, to the x to the power of 2 essentially is what I'm doing. I could do plus, and we could do like a fraction here, for example. We could do like 1 over y minus 3, something like that. Anyway, so you can create any sort of math equation that you want. And they have all kinds of tools in here. They have every kind of bracket you want, every kind of fraction or percent or square root or anything you want. They have all kinds of tools in here for everything from the basic math all the way up to algebra, 1, 2, geometry, trigonometry, physics, statistics, calculus, you name it. So it can be advanced or as simple as you want. So you use this to create your math equation real quick, and then you simply highlight this with your mouse pointer, and you can right click and say copy. And now we've copied it, so we created or recreated, maybe if we were kind of recreating from a math test or a quiz or something a teacher wanted us to Braille. So I copy that, I come back over here to my text label tool. Again, I'm gonna click on that third option, which is math input, and I'm gonna click wherever on my document I want to place that Braille label. I click there, and this time when I click, I get a little pop-up window. So in here, it allows me to choose my math code. So I'm going to choose Nemeth because I believe California has a Nemeth state. Some states do UEB math instead. It kind of depends on the location or maybe what your student is doing. So I'm going to choose Nemeth as my math code, and I say paste in math equation from clipboard. I paste it in. It gives you my text representation, my special visually kind of properly formatted representation, and then it gives me my Braille representation right here. Now, God forbid, hopefully this Braille representation should be 100% correct. The accuracy so far has been good, but should you need to, you can actually Braille, 6-key Braille or erase and correct or add to your Braille math before inserting the label. When you're happy, you press OK, and there we go. It took this math equation I made, x to the second plus 1 over y minus 3 equals, and it converted it to Nemeth math for me, just like that. And now I pasted it in, and I have that in Braille math. So it really makes producing Nemeth or whatever math labels you're doing quick and easy. So those are kind of your 3 Braille label tools. So that's how you essentially are going to label or create any sort of Braille text or writing that you need for labeling your tactile graphics. Okay, so moving on from the Braille label tool, moving down, we have a select area tool. And so if I just draw this out, it works like kind of most selection tools that you would, you've used in like, I don't know if you've ever used Microsoft Paint or Adobe or any of those kind of things where you can select an area and grab, move stuff within that area. Now, on this selection tool, when I draw a selected area, you'll notice there's a little blue box and a little red box. So I'm going to pause real quick and talk about the 2 different drawing elements within TactileView. Because that's what the red box and blue box are for. So if I grab my little pencil tool over here, and I'm just gonna make this a touch bit thicker, and I draw out, I don't want to do a solid line there. I'm just kind of draw out a pretty terrible circle, but it will work for our example here. So I drew out a circle using my pencil tool, and you'll notice that it shows up in black on screen. And then I drew out a circle using my circle tool earlier, and you notice that turns blue on screen. So these are the 2 types of drawing elements within TactileView, and it's kind of important to kind of note these 2 because the way they work is a little bit different. Anything that is in black is part of an image or part of a graphic, or TactileView sometimes refers to it as part of the bitmap image. Essentially, it's part of the drawing. As where any of the blue tools you use or anything that you see show up in blue is an object. Now the difference is that an object, anytime after you've placed it or created it, you can click on it, pick it up, grab one of the sides or corners and resize and reshape it and place it and move it and do whatever you want. You can essentially manipulate an object after you've placed it in any way that you like to. As where something that's part of the drawing and shows up in black, you actually have to kind of, you can't click on it, right? It's part of the image. I can grab my eraser tool and I can erase it, but I can't select it like it's an object because it is part of the image or the graphic, if you will. So it's kind of just important to note those two types of drawing elements there. Most of the time, you'll probably be drawing or using the object tool, so you can pick them up and move them around. But if I bring in an image or something like that, since an image is not an object exactly, and you want to get rid of part of it, it's more like the black, and you can erase it and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to kind of clarify those two. Hopefully that's clear. Those two types of drawing elements within TactileView. So now if I go back and grab my selection tool, this is where those little boxes come in. So I can select an area that I want to move around, and the red box will move anything that's part of the image or shows up in black, and clicking on the little blue box will move anything that is an object. So if you want to move groups of objects or something like that together, you can do that. So let's say I want to move something that's part of the picture. I select the area I want to move and click on the little red square, and then allows me to pick up and move those parts of the image using the selection tool. And when I'm done, there's a little black box I click on and it kind of puts it back in place into the graphic. And then if I had objects or multiple objects that I want to move, I can use the selection tool, click on the blue square instead, and it allows me to move objects or groups of objects together around my document. So that is the selection tool. Essentially, it's for picking up and selecting and moving parts of your graphic. The next option here is a detect shape tool. And what this is for mainly, let me kind of repair my circle that I drew here. The selection or the detect shape tool here is what it's for is detecting the shape of an area. So I'm going to get it more into detail on this in just a minute. But things that are objects, you can add fills and pattern fills and texture fills, color fills, all kinds of different things to them. You can edit them in a lot of different ways. As we're with something that's part of the image, it's a little harder to do since you can't click on it and pick it up. It doesn't have a kind of a detectable area. So that's where the detect shape tool comes in, because it actually allows you to detect the shape of an enclosed area like that. If I clicked in the middle of that circle I drew, it detected the shape of the circle, and that would allow me to add fills and different line styles and things like that, which I will go into in a little more detail in a little bit here. So that's what the detect shape tool does. So the next option here is the filters menu. This is something I'm going to come back to and go into a little more detail later on when I go ahead and bring in an image and show you how the filters work. I just want to make you aware that the filters tool is here, and these are your different filter options. Now, I'm going to come back to this, but instead of using the filters icon on the toolbar, there is a dedicated filters menu up the top, which gives you a text description instead of an icon. I personally prefer the filters menu at the top instead, simply because I think that the text description is a little clearer as to what it does than the icon is in some cases. For example, convert to line drawing would convert an image to a line drawing. And again, we'll come back and play with some of these a little bit later on. But either the filters icon on the toolbar, you can choose one of those, or the filters menu up top. They both have the same options on them. I just simply prefer to use the filters menu at the top because the text description rather than the icon, I feel like represents what it does a little bit better. So again, we'll come back and apply some filters to some images later on. I'll show you how those work. So moving on from the filters, the next option is our pencil tool. And this is for simply just drawing or creating hand drawings in the software. This does work really well with touchscreens. If you have a stylus, this is pretty cool. You can hand draw with a stylus. That's kind of neat. But essentially, it's a pencil tool for drawing. Now, up at the top, when you click on the pencil tool, you do have a few options for that pencil tool. The first option is to scale it. So you can choose your size. So it can be really fine for detailed work, or you can make it larger if you want a nice, thick, bold line. You can also choose between drawing straight lines or simply freehand drawing. So the difference is freehand drawing is simply you click and drag, and wherever you click and drag, it follows. As we're drawing a straight line, when you click and drag, it places a point at the beginning of your click and then draws a straight line from where you started your click to where you end your click. So you can draw straight lines that way if you'd like to. And then you can also choose between a circular or a square tip for your drawing instrument as well. So there's a circle, or excuse me, there's a square and there's a circle. So depending on what you're drawing, those may be helpful to choose between. Okay, moving on, we have the eraser tool. And essentially it's the same options as the pencil tool, except for obviously you're going to erase instead of draw. So you can choose to erase in straight lines. You can choose to freehand erase. So wherever you click and drag will erase. You can choose between a circular or a square pointer for your eraser. This is really handy actually for an eraser, because if you're trying to erase or clean up along a curved line, the circle is very handy, versus if you're trying to clean up like straight edges, the square is very handy. Again, you can also use a little scale bar up at the top to choose how big or how small you want this pointer to be for your eraser. You can make it really, really fine for detailed cleanup work, or you can just make it just ridiculously massive if you just want to clean up your entire page at one time. Okay, I'll make that a little bit more realistic, something like 8 pixels, that's good. Okay, moving on here, we're starting in our objects. So all these next options we're going to go over are objects, meaning they are the blue ones that when you draw, they're blue, and even after you've placed them, you can go back, click on them, pick them up, move it around your tactile graphic and manipulate them however you like. So starting out, we have a line tool. And so it works pretty much kind of like the line tool with the pencil does, but rather than it drawing out and you have to erase it, you can actually click on that line, pick it up, grab one of the corners and kind of rescale it or move it around however you'd like after you've drawn it out. So you'll notice when I click on an object, there's a little menu that pops up with some different options for that object. The first one is the size and position of it. This is the same menu, if I click on this, that if I went up to the drawing tools, as though I was doing it with a screen reader and clicked on it, it's the same menu that pops up. It allows you to choose where it's placed. It allows you to choose the length of it or the rotation. So the nice thing about this is, of course, you can freehand and kind of just click and drag and draw out whatever it is that you want to create, say, okay, eyeball it, say that looks like about the right length. Or if you are trying to be very precise, you can. So what I could do is I come in here and I say, okay, I want this line I just drew out. I'm going to want it to be 4 inches long. And I could say I want it to be rotated at 45 degrees exactly. So you can be very precise. When you press OK, there you go. It drew me a 4-inch long line that is exactly at a 45-degree angle. So again, freehand things if you want to. Lots of times that's good enough. But if you need to be precise, you can be. And even though this line might not look 4 inches when it's drawn on screen, when it embosses out on a Braille embosser or whatever you're creating your tactile graphics on, it will actually be a 4-inch long line, which is really cool. Okay, so if I click on this line again here, we have some additional options. We have an option to center up on our graphic. So if I click that, you'll notice it centers it. And now it doesn't center it vertically speaking, it actually just centers it horizontally. So you could kind of create a stack of objects or something like that if you wanted to. Moving on here, we have an option which restricts your movement to just horizontal or vertical. So normally when you click on an object and drag it around, you can put it anywhere you want. But for the sake of alignment or something like that, you may want to just move it perfectly straight up or down, right or left, or at a 45-degree angle, and that's what this restrict movement does. So if I click on that and I drag my line now, you'll notice that it only drags in a perfectly straight line, up, down, left or right, or at a perfect 45-degree angle. So that kind of helps you keep things aligned as you're moving them around your document. Pardon me. Okay, so I'm going to turn that off. The next option is line style. So now this is a solid line, so it would come out a solid line of Braille dots if you were to emboss it. But sometimes you may want dotted or dashed lines or something along those lines. So if I click on the line styles here, we have options. There's a little drop-down menu here, which lets you pick from a whole laundry list. They are pretty small on screen, so it might be hard to see. But there is a whole bunch of different dot, dash, or dash dot patterns you can choose from. So if you find one that looks good, you select it. It even gives you a little preview along the bottom, and you have a little up and down or scale bar to choose your line thickness. And when you're happy, you press OK, and it adds that line style for you. So I just made my solid blue line into a dashed line now. Now I'm going to go back and switch that back because I actually, for the sake of example, prefer solid lines. So I'm going to go back and switch it to a solid. And I'm going to change it. 3 pixels is just fine, actually. And there we are. Okay, we're back to a solid line. But that same option applies for any of the objects we're going to be going through, as you'll see later on. The next option here for our line that we have is to change repeat on. So by default, when you click and drag out and you're drawing a straight line using the object tool, when you're done dragging, it stops drawing. Now let's say maybe you need to make a whole bunch of straight lines in a row. What you could do is turn on repeat, and that turning on that repeat would allow you to draw line after line after line until you press escape to stop drawing those lines. So that's what the repeat option does. There's also an option to restrict your restrict you to just horizontal or just vertical or just drawing at a 45-degree angle. So similar to the restrict movement, which would restrict your movement after placing the object, this would restrict your movement while drawing out the line to help you draw perfectly straight lines up, down, left, or right, or at a 45-degree angle. So these next two options are for adding audio labels. So that's for the piece I talked to you about, or I told you about, that adds the kind of the audio labels to the graphics. So this, you can either record an audio label with the microphone on your computer, or this top option here, this would allow you to add a MP3 file or type in text that would be spoken with a voice synthesizer. So again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about those, but I'd be happy to answer questions after the fact if you would like. So these next two options have to do with layering, move to front or move to back. Now let me draw like a square here. This will make a lot more sense with two filled objects rather than a line. So right now I had drew out a square and I put it on top of the circle I drew. Now currently you can see the circle through my square because it's transparent. So if I click on the square, there's an option here that says change to cover underlying image. So if I click on that, it makes it so my object isn't transparent. So when it overlaps another object, it covers it up. So you can do that with any of your objects, make them transparent or not, so that you can see essentially anything that they might be on top of. And then those move to front and move to back options allows you to reorder your stacking as well. So for example, if I wanted to move this square behind my circle, I could say move to back. And when I do, now my circle is on top of my square. So that allows you to click on an object and move it up or down in the layering system to layer those objects up as however you would like. So going back to my line here I drew out, there's a couple more options. There's one called fuse with bitmap. Essentially what this means is turn this from an object into a line drawing. Now there's a few reasons you may want to do that. An object, since it's something you click and pick up and move around anytime after you've placed it, it's a solid object, meaning that you can't grab your eraser tool and you can't erase that object. So if there was an instance where you had an object or something that you created with objects and you wanted to be able to erase those, that's where the fuse bitmap comes into. So if I do that, you'll notice my circle that I had turned from blue into black. Now it's part of the picture. I can't click on it anymore. However, I can grab my eraser tool and I come over here and erase it and modify it that way if I would like. Okay, so going back to my line, there's also options to copy it or delete it or a little help menu as well. Okay, so just for the sake of time, I'm going to move over to a new blank document because I'm starting to fill that one up. So moving on here, we have a square tool, and it works fairly similarly, except for there's a couple more options since it's a filled object. So if I click on my square tool, you'll notice there's some similar type options. So I can choose the size and position of the square. So that opens up that dialog box, which allows me to be very exact with my size and placement if I'd like to. So I could make my square very precise if I wanted to. There's also an option to rotate, so I could rotate it. So let's say, again, I want to rotate my square 45 degrees. I could type that in here, press OK, and there we go. There's my square rotated at 45 degrees. Now, at any time with any of these objects, you can either grab a corner or a side and scale these. So let's say I want to turn the square into more of a rectangle. I can do that by grabbing one of the sides and dragging it out. Moving on here, I can also center my object. So if I want to center it up, again, that's just vertically. It doesn't center it it's just horizontally, not vertically when you center something. I can restrict that movement, so just move it up or down, left or right, or at a 45-degree angle like I talked about with the line. I could also choose my line style, so if I want a dot or a dash instead of a solid line, I could do that. And now, since this is a filled object or has kind of an area in the middle of it, or an enclosed object rather, you can also add texture or pattern fills to it. So I'm going to click on this option here. It looks kind of like a square with a bunch of lines through it, and I can choose, pardon me, there's a button that says choose texture. Now there's a variety of different textures in here. There's asterisks, blocks wave, bricks, solid fills, dashed and straight lines, just dotted lines, dots, smaller dots, double circles, raindrops, filled dots, squares, filled triangles, fish scales, grids, hexagons, octagons, just solid lines, mirrored half circles, rain, stars, whole zigzags, waves, all kinds of stuff here. So you pretty much choose a pattern. I like the mirrored half circle. That's one of my personal favorites. So I'm going to select it and press OK. When I do, it shows me a preview of that. And then I have a couple options within that as well. So there's a little scale bar or a number. You could type in a number or use these up and down arrows, or you can grab a scale bar with your mouse, and I can choose the size of that texture fill as well. So I can make that as big or small as big or as small as I want, and it's reflected there in my preview window. Not only can I choose the size of this, but I can also choose the rotation. So I can rotate this any way that I'd like as well, 360-degree rotation. So when I'm happy with my pattern fill, I've chosen a rotation and a size, I press OK, and it adds that fill into my square. So we can do a variety of different pattern or texture fills here using that feature, and that works with any of the object tools that I'm going to go through that have an enclosed area on them. Now the cool thing is you notice there was a pretty good list. I think there was 15 or maybe 20 different types of fills or patterns that you can do. But the cool thing about being able to change the size and the rotation of those fills is that to touch, if I made this same pattern smaller and a different angle, it would feel to touch when you're exploring a tactile graphic completely different. So you can actually recycle the same pattern multiple times by having it in different sizes and different rotations. So that actually really kind of double or maybe even triples the amount of types of patterns you can make for your tactile graphics. Okay, so moving on from pattern fills, we also have color fills. So if you want to fill it with a solid color, you can do that as well. There are a couple Braille embosser brands out there that allow you to do tactile graphics, Braille, and print. And there's one that will allow you to do color, ink, and Braille and tactile graphics all in one shot. So being able to add the color fills, you could add in that kind of ink element as well for those embossers. Okay, and then moving on here, we have the option to make it transparent or not. So that's so it covers up whatever object is below it. We have those two options for adding audio labels. We have the options for moving things forward and backwards within the layering system, fusing this with the bitmap image so that we could erase on it if we didn't want it to be an object, copying it or deleting it. Okay, so that is the square tool. Moving on here, we have the circle tool, and for the most part, it's all the same options, really, except for you'd be doing it with a circle instead of a square. Pardon me. So I drew out a circle here, and you have pretty much the same options. You can choose the size and position. You can rotate it. Now, I don't know why you'd want to rotate a circle, but what we could do is grab a side here, and we could turn it into an oval, and maybe it makes sense to rotate the oval. You can also center it. You can restrict that movement to just horizontal or vertical like you can with all the other graphics. Change that line style to like a dot or dash pattern. Add any type of pattern or texture fill you want. So let's just do one more texture fill just for fun. Let's do the hexagons this time. And that looks pretty good. Kind of looks like honeycomb. I'm gonna press OK. And there we go. There's another pattern fill just to give you an example. I'm gonna switch over to dot view and let's take a look at how that one emboss. So that's how it's gonna emboss. I'll zoom in so you can see the individual Braille dots there. And there it is. So that gives you a little kind of example of what that would look like in Braille. Let me zoom back out. Okay, there we go. And switch back to line view again. And there we are. Okay, so that is the circle tool. Now next, it gets a little bit more exciting because this is triangles. Now triangles, as I'm sure you all know, are used throughout math, especially in algebra, geometry, trigonometry, all those. There's tons of triangles, angles, all that kind of stuff. So this triangle tool is very helpful for this because it allows you to draw out different types of triangles. So there is a right triangle. I could choose also an isosceles triangle, an equilateral triangle, or, and I have to grab a side and make it scalene, or you could do a scalene triangle. So you can quickly and easily choose the type of triangle that you want and put it in here. Now, for this example, I'm just going to create a, if you all remember back, or maybe you worked with some students recently, remember 30, 60, 90 right triangles way back? You know, I don't even remember what grade that was, to be honest with you. But 30, 60, 90 right triangles. So what I could do is I could grab one of these corners and I can just eyeball it. You know, that looks about like a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So I can do that if I want to. But if I want to, again, I can be very, very precise. So I can come in here and the top icon on here is position of anchor points. And this shows me anchor point A, anchor point B, anchor point C. These effectively are my corners A, B, and C. And you'll notice they are labeled in green for me, A, B, and C. And I could say, okay, I know angle A is 90 degrees, so that's not going to change. But so angle C, I can have that be my 30-degree angle. Now I got close. I had 34.2 degrees for that angle, but I want this to be exactly 30 degrees. So I'm going to type that in. I press OK. I could also choose like distance from one corner to the next. So if I want here, I can change the distance from angle C to angle A. So that would be this back side right along here. I could change that. So if I need that to be a precise number, I could do that as well as being very precise with my angles too. So I press OK, and there we are. There is a perfect 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So from here, I add a few Braille labels, you know, that kind of thing, and you're basically done. Now there's a few more helpful tools in here. So you notice it labels my corners A, B, and C, and it also puts in a right triangle indicator for me. Now, but if I click away, you notice those disappear. And that's because when something's in green like this, or text is in green like this on screen, it's really there for your, just for on screen for your benefit, but it's not permanently there to stay. But if we go through our options for these triangles, we go to angles and lines, and this brings up a little kind of little box with a bunch of check marks here. And this allows you to braille the right triangle indicator. So if I want to braille this angle indicator here, right now it's green. If I check this box, now it turns blue, and that means it's not just on screen for my benefit anymore, it's actually going to stay there, and now we'll braille it box out. Let's say I want Braille labels for my corners A, B, and C. I just simply check this box, and you notice my A, B, and C turn into Braille for me right there. Let's say I want altitude lines for corner A, B, or C, median lines from corner A, B, or C, or even bisector lines from corners A, B, or C. I simply just click on one of those, and it adds it in there for me. Don't even have to do any extra work. I just check or uncheck whatever I want inside there. And now if I click away, you'll notice that right triangle indicator stayed and my Braille labels stayed there. They're not going off screen anymore. So they're already there. Maybe we add, you know, some side lengths or a little Braille label that indicates one of the angles. And then we're ready to emboss pretty much. Pardon me. So that is triangles. So it allows you to quickly and easily create any sort of triangle or angle if you needed to. For math. So maybe even if you weren't just creating a triangle, but you wanted to create an angle or a specific angle, you come in, create a triangle with the correct angle that you wanted. Then we could go down to, remember that fuse with bitmap option. If I click on that, my triangle turns from blue to black. Now I can grab my eraser and I can get rid of any of those extra sides that I didn't need. And there we go. Now I have a perfect 60-degree angle. And I could Braille label that or do whatever else I needed to it. So as you can see, this triangle tool does a lot of the work for you. All you have to do is draw it out, choose a couple measurements, add a few Braille labels, and you're off and running. Okay, so I'm going to do another just kind of blank document here just to kind of clear out my workspace a touch bit. And then let's move on here. So the next option is a polygon tool. So rather than having a tool for an octagon, a hexagon, and well, you know, all the different polygons that you may want to do, what they did is they just added one polygon tool. So what this allows you to do is simply kind of draw out your rough polygon with as many sides as you want. I'm just going to make a the world's worst stop sign here. So I click, and when I want to reconnect to my last or final point, there's a little green circle. If I click on that, it reconnects my final point to my first point. And there we go. There is a not horrible, but not good octagon there. So what I can do is go back and click on any of these points and replace them. So if I wanted to clean it up, you know, by hand a little bit, I could do that. Or I can go do the same option as I did with my triangles, and it shows me position of anchor points. And I can go in through here, and every single one, here's the same, you know, here's the anchor points for every single angle I put in. So I have a couple different options. Probably the easiest one is to make all of the side lengths the same length, and then you would have a perfect octagon of whatever, however many sides you chose. That would be one way to do it, or divide like 360 degrees by the number of angles that you want. Something like that, and it allows you to create any sort of polygon that you might want. So that is the polygon tool, and just like all the other, you know, all the other objects, these all have the same other features. I forgot to go over them, but you can rotate it, center it, add, you know, line styles, add textures, add fills, make it transparent or not, move it up and down the layering system, so on and so forth, like you can with all the other objects. Pardon me. So our next option here is to draw a curved path. And so this is if you're trying to draw a nice curving, swooping line, that's what this tool is for. So what you do is kind of draw out your rough shape here, something like that. I'm gonna press escape to stop. And now you notice all my all my corners are sharp, hard corners. And this is where that draw curved path tool comes in. I click on it and I click on any of the corners or the kind of angles, and I click on it, and there's these small, they're probably gonna be a little hard to see on screen, but there's these little green balls that pop up, and you grab them on either side of your kind of corner, and you grab it and it allows you to adjust the curvature of that line. So what I can do is add a little bit of a curve, something like that. Now if I click away, now rather than having a sharp curve or corner, I have a nice curving, swooping line right there. And I can do that same thing for any of these other points on here as well. So I could do something like that. Something along those lines. There we go. So this could be used from drawing anything where you want nice, smooth, curving lines, or it could be used for maybe drawing your own graph on if you're creating a math graph or something like that. You could draw it out loosely and then kind of add any sort of curvature that you wanted to it. Anything you want with a curved path, this tool is for drawing that. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. The next option here is a draw filled dot. Now, all this does is simply draws out a filled dot. Now, on its own, there's a few kind of uses for it, but what I like to use it for is plotting points on a graph. Like if I created a graph, I'm gonna get into graphing here in just a moment, but if I created a graph, you could use it to plot points on a graph or something like that. That's what I like to use it for. You can also adjust the size of it if you want to as well. Moving on here, we have a draw table tool. So this draws out a table. By default, it starts out as a 3x3 grid, but there's a variety of options in here, like creating a little table of contents or adding or deleting columns and rows. So this option here allows you to insert rows, insert columns, delete rows, delete columns, choose the position you want to place or delete from, and choose the number of columns or rows that you want to add or delete. And then you can also choose when adding or deleting columns to either keep the table dimensions or the dimensions of the cell. So let's go ahead and let's insert a column just for fun. I'm gonna insert 2 columns, and I wanna keep the same cell dimensions and have my table grow to compensate. So I press OK, and there we go. It added 2 columns for me, kept my cells the same size, but extended my table to compensate for those new cells. Pardon me. Okay, so you could also add rows this way, delete columns, delete rows, same way. You also have all the same other options for this, like you do any other object, moving it, centering it, adding line styles, adding pattern fills, deleting it, making it transparent or not, adding those audio labels, same options as you do with all the other ones. Now, one cool thing about the table tool, though, is whatever you write or put inside the table. So, for example, I'm just going to write the word test, and I'm going to kind of center it up in my top or my upper left-hand cell. There we go. That looks pretty good. So let's say we created a table, we filled it full of text or whatever we wanted inside the table. And we're like, oh shoot, I need one more column, but if I change this, everything's going to be misaligned. Well, what you can do is when you add anything inside the table that you're making inside TactileView, and I grab and I scale this, you'll notice that it actually moves my text and tries to keep its same relative position within the cell. Or if I pick up my table and move my table around, everything I put inside my table stays inside my table. So you don't have to worry about making adjustments, shifting it around, or regrowing or moving your table when you're doing that. I think this is also kind of a nifty way to create bar charts too, is you could create a rough table and then fill in the squares as well. That's kind of a neat way to create a bar chart if you wanted to. Okay, so that's tables real quickly. Now moving on here, this is probably one of the most exciting features I think of TactileView, because I cannot tell you how many TBIs and Braillists I've talked to that have spent hours drawing out graphs by hand. So TactileView is one of the very few programs that allows you to create and graph a graph and turn it into a tactile graphic extremely easily. So if I move down here to my next tool, which is draw graph, I click on this, I have a few different options. My top option is to simply input a blank graph. So if I do that, there is a blank graph already Braille labeled for me, all set. I could draw my own graph on this, I could plot my own points on this, and basically you're ready to go with minor adjustments. Now, everything about this can be customized, just so you know, but I'll show you how to do that when graphing an equation rather than just inserting a blank graph. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that blank graph. You can see already that just throws me in a blank graph template. That can already save a tremendous amount of time over drawing it out by hand and Braille labeling it by hand. So that is a huge, huge feature right there. But if we go back to the graphing tool, we click on this second option here, which is add graph from equation editor. So this is the same thing as using math type like I showed you before to add Nemeth math equations. So let's say we want to graph something. I'm just going to do something simple like a parabola. So I'm going to do x to the second. I'm going to highlight that with my mouse, copy it. You could also do Control A and Control C for keyboard shortcuts. But I'm just going to copy that, go back over to TactileView, go to my graphing tool, click on the second option here. Brings up a similar window to what I had before when I was just inserting a Nemeth math label. I can choose my math code I want represented on my for my Braille labels on my graph. I can paste in my math equation. It gives me the same options: my text representation, my special properly formatted, visually formatted math representation, and my Braille representation for that as well. And when I press OK, it actually graphs it for me and it gives me a little preview over here. And within this window, I can edit virtually anything I want about this graph. So I can choose the math code my labels show up in. I can choose the text label for it. I can choose my line style for my graph. So maybe rather than doing a solid line, I want a dotted line, a dashed line, or a dot dash line, anything like that. Okay, I could also go back and I could edit my formula if I wanted to make any changes there. I can go to position and appearance, and this gives me some kind of general graphing options for appearance. So for example, do I want to draw a border around my graph? I could say no and uncheck that and apply it. And now you'll notice on the preview, the border around my graph goes away. I could also choose my line styles for my grid boxes. A lot of Braille embossers out there that are capable of producing tactile graphics only do one Braille dot height. So sometimes if your X and Y axes and your grid line and your graph line are all the same dot height and there's no different widths to distinguish them, one thing you could do is change like the grid lines to like dotted or dashed lines instead. So you can choose those inside here. So I will do, I'll do dashed lines instead, and I press apply here, and you'll see that it's going to be a little bit small and probably hard to see on your screen, but updated and showed dashed lines instead. I can also choose the thickness for my grid boxes as well. I could choose the thickness of those, so I can make those thicker or thinner. I could choose the thickness of my formula lines, make those a little bit thicker and easier to distinguish from one another. I could choose the thickness of my X and Y axes as well to make those easier to distinguish from my grid lines and my graph line. And when I'm happy, I press OK. I can also go in and adjust anything about my horizontal or vertical properties. So I'm just going to show you the vertical properties because the options are the same, just one applies to my x-axis, one applies to my y-axis. And my, pardon me, my parabola that I graphed here is primarily positive. So I'd like to change my window size so I see more of a positive graph instead. So if I press on my y-axis here, I can choose the actual height of my graph if I want to. I can choose my values shown on my graph here. So I could choose from -4 to +4 or whatever window size I want. In this case, I'm going to go from -2 to +6. I think that would be a little bit better. Press apply, gets a little updated in that preview. And there you go. I can also choose anything I want to about my text labels here, how they're represented, the position of those labels. I can make any adjustments I want right inside here. I press OK one more time. And there we go, there's my graph. And I could even grab it and I could stretch it out if I want a little bit bigger there to fit maybe the whole page. And there is my graph. Once you kind of know where the options are, you could easily take an equation, graph it, and turn it into a Braille label tactile graphic in under 30 seconds, as where a lot of TVIs I've seen take hours to do just one single graphic. So I think this is a hugely powerful tool right here. And then how are we doing on time? I'm just, I think, over my time actually. So I'm going to hurry through one last thing to show you guys that I think is really cool. It's really the last feature anyway to show you, and that is importing graphics and adding filters. So I'm going to go to my import icon, and I can choose, I can import SVGs, JPEGs, or PNGs. SVG, that's just a vector graphic. That means you can infinitely scale it without losing resolution. Some people create those in like professional drawing tools like Adobe Illustrator, CorelDRAW, things like that. you might want to bring those in, or JPEGs and PNGs, which are probably the two most common image file formats out there. Most any picture you'll get will probably be in a JPEG or PNG. I've seen people take pictures of like tests and quiz they wanted to Braille, like with their smartphone, email it to themselves, pull in TactileView that way, take screenshots or something, or save a picture off the internet that they want and have it as a JPEG and bring it in. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring in a JPEG. All right, so I have, let's see, I have some pictures in here, not my desktop, that's not what I wanted. Right here, documents, subdocs. Okay, I got some kind of fun ones. I got a little race car, an elephant, a house, a rocket ship, hippopotamus, or Pete the cat. I'm going to do the elephant just because I think it kind of illustrates the filters the best, but I'm going to click in. Here's my elephant. I'm going to kind of rescale him, size him down to kind of fit on my page a little bit better. There we go. Okay. There he is. Okay, so what I want to show you here is kind of the before and after, if you will. So I'm going to go over and look at my dot view. So this is what he looks like right now. That's just a solid mess of Braille dots. That's not a particularly good tactile graphic. So I'm going to switch back over to my line view. It looks a lot better like this. And this is where I'm going to go to my filters menu, and I'm going to say convert to line drawing. This is probably the filter you're going to use 10 out of 10 times. There's some other kind of useful ones like convert to black and white, change line thickness, rotate counterclockwise, mirror horizontally, mirror vertically, things like that that can be helpful, but convert to line drawing is definitely the most powerful. So I'm going to click on that, and when I do, you'll notice he converts to line drawing, but he almost disappears. And that's because TactileView doesn't quite know how much detail you want or don't. And for that, there's a little scale bar, and I can scale this up or down to increase or decrease that detail. There we go. Now my elephant looks pretty good. Let's take a look at that dot view again. It looks so much better. Maybe I have a few kind of miscellaneous dots. I could grab my eraser tool. I could clean that up a little bit, you know, add a few Braille labels, and essentially you're off and running. So that allows you to bring in essentially any picture you want, whether you download it off the internet, you got it from one of those tactile graphics online catalogs. I like to go on like Wolfram Alpha. They have tons of good math and science stuff, and you can download images off of there, or even just use Google image search. If you can find something a little simpler, that's usually generally more conducive to a good tactile graphic, just as a general practice. But then you can bring it inside here, convert it to line drawing, add a few Braille labels, and you're off and running. So I don't want to take up your guys' entire evening, so that is essentially the basics of TactileView. So with that, Dr. Ting, if there is any questions, or if anybody has any questions they want to ask, I'm happy to take those. Go ahead and stop my screen sharing there. Okay, there we go.
This is Nick. Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, hey, Nick, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, John?
I recognize you, yeah.
Yeah. So all those sheets that you were doing in there, is that saved to like one project, or is it individual files?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So I forgot to show this so each kind of white, if you notice there's a white work area, let me just do super quick here. So you notice there's a white work area, and then around the edge there's a red border.
Yeah.
That red border essentially is your paper size, and the white area is your workspace. So each red square represents one kind of page, and what I can do is I can bring this over, and I can either add an extra page, or I can even scale graphics across multiple pages and boss them out on separate pages and tape it together to form one larger tactile graphic.
Wow.
So this way I could add multiple pages to my document, or I could create larger graphics that scale over or across as many pages as I want and tape them together after they're embossed to form a larger one. Especially math and things like, or not math, excuse me, maps and things like that, because they can really benefit from greater detail. I think it really excel from being made into large tactile graphics, especially if you're talking about like a campus map or something like that. That's really helpful. Does that answer your question?
That does kind of, but then I was also kind of more wondering, like when you go and save, like you had 3 separate windows open. So are those saved as one project, or are they saved as 3 individual files?
Those would be 3 individual files. Essentially, individual files open up in tabs if you have multiple files open at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. So those would be individual files, not necessarily one project. If you want to do multiple kind of pages within one project, you would do it just the way I just showed you.
Gotcha. That helps. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, anybody else? Yeah, it's I can't point at you, but I don't know your name. But go ahead. The gentleman there is waving.
Hi, this is Adam. You might have already gone over this, but how much does that program cost?
Yeah, if you guys don't mind me saying how much it costs, it's actually probably one of the most affordable assistive technology programs I've ever seen. It's half the price of most Braille translators. It's $295, which for anything in this industry, that is a screaming deal. I think most Braille translators cost around $700. So $295 is, I think, an excellent deal, especially for the power it has. Yeah.
John, did I see on, this is Nick again, did I see on the website that it's unlimited uses for that price?
No, it is one.
That's one computer?
It can be as many users on the same computer as you want.
That's what it means. Okay.
Yeah.
And
So,
do they have like a multi-use like account or anything like that?
We've been asking for that forever. They don't.
Okay.
Probably in the future, but if you want multiple computers, it's just multiple licenses. If you do buy a bunch, we'll give you some sort of price break on that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Anybody else?
John, what was the name of the pen that you had mentioned to go with audio tactile graphics?
I don't know the name of the exact pen. It comes with the audio reading system piece of TactileView. So that's kind of an add-on, or you can buy it all as one package to get that along with it. Anyway, it is a digital pen. I don't know the exact name of the pen. It just comes with the full package of everything that you need to add those audio labels. And
I looked it up and it was called TactileView ClickPad Manual. Does that sound right?
That's probably the manual, but
or ClickPad.
The ClickPad is part of it, yes.
Oh, okay.
ClickPad, which is essentially what you put your graphic on, then you use the digital pen to click essentially on your graphic on the pad, on the ClickPad, to then have the audio labels play back. If you're interested in learning more about it, you can go online and just search YouTube for TactileView. There's a company called IRE-AT. They're the distributors for this product for all of the United States, and they have some older webinars that go over in detail how that audio system part works. If you're interested in looking into that some more, or if you have questions, I'd be happy to show that to you as well.
Thanks, John. And I had one question, just asking in case anybody else had this question.
Sure.
So you mentioned that in the very beginning that the software isn't tied to any specific embosser, but do people need to buy at least a type of embosser that will support tactile graphics embossing, or will any embosser work?
Now, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked. Most embossers nowadays do support graphics to some certain extent. Now, as far as tactile graphics go, not all embossers are made equal. I will say that. I would say the ones as far as embossing tactile graphics that are probably the best and kind of leading the charge is View Plus or Tiger. You guys may have heard of one called Tiger. The company name is actually View Plus Technologies. They, I would say, are probably the best simply because their embossers allow you to do multiple dot heights. I think for even just creating math graphs where you can have the grid lines lower than the X and Y axes and have different kind of dot heights to play with, I think that is probably the best. That being said, essentially any View Plus or Tiger embosser does great tactile graphics. The Index embossers and the newer Romeo and Juliets from Humanware, those all do good tactile graphics as well, except for they only have the one dot height. So you have to kind of, certain things, maybe you have to do dotted, dashed lines or something else to distinguish things from one another. But they still do very nice tactile graphics. Yeah. So
this is Nick. Follow-up question to that. So would the Braille view look different for if you were printing to a Tiger embosser than another one?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it actually reflects the differences. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah. So TactileView is smart enough to recognize the type of embosser that you're using and switch. I don't know if you guys remember at the beginning, I briefly talked about embosser DPI. Essentially, different embossers run off of different tactile graphic resolutions, if you will. And TactileView is smart enough to know what resolution that embosser uses and change it for that embosser, and you will see that reflected in that dot view. Some of the older Tiger stuff, if you're familiar with the Tiger Max, which is the one that's recommended for the smarter balance testing, that one has it's more stuck on a grid pattern, and so there's a little bit of a stair-step effect to the Braille, and you'll see that reflected in the Braille preview if you have that embosser that you're using, or pretty much any of the new View Pluses, the new indexes, or the enablings, all do kind of a floating point graphic, meaning they can essentially put a dot basically wherever they want because they're not limited to a grid. And those get a little bit nicer curves and corners, but they don't all have the dot height. So anyway, if you have your eye on a specific embosser or you have an embosser that you're questioning, do feel free to reach out to us. And I'm happy to leave you all with my contact information as well.
Hey. Great. Well, thank you so much, John, for doing this presentation. I know it's been a long night for everybody, so thanks for hanging out and staying, you guys.
Yeah, thank you guys all for giving me your time. I know I ran over a little bit. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It was all good info.
It was great info. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
Is it all right if I get my contact info out real quick?
Oh, yeah, please do. Yeah, please.
So again, my name's John Taylor. I'm with Sterling Adaptives. And you can either call me at 541-231-3920, or you can email me at john@sterling, as in like sterling silver, adaptives.com. And if anybody missed that, I know Dr. Ting at least has my email, so feel free to pass that out. But Sterling Adaptives.
The phone number one more time?
Go ahead. Sorry, what was that? Say it one more.
Can you repeat your phone number one more time?
541-231-3920. And then Sterling Adaptives, if I may make a shameless plug just real fast, Sterling Adaptives does a lot more than tactile graphics and Braille embossers, although we do that. We represent all three lines of Braille embossers I talked to you about. So if anybody wants a demonstration of that or an in-person demonstration of TactileView in the northern half of California, we're happy to do that. We also do Braille displays, Braille note takers, CCTVs, video magnifiers, everything from handhelds to portable CCTVs with distance view and OCR, all that kind of stuff. Pretty much all the major brands, Humanware, all the IRI stuff, View Plus, Tiger, Index, enabling, LVI, which makes some really fantastic video magnifiers, especially for distance view. Orcam, you might be familiar with them. Zoomax, their video magnifiers. Anyway, so we have a real full suite of Braille and video magnification stuff. And if anybody needs in-person demonstrations or anything like that, or training on any of the above, we provide it all.
Awesome. Thank you, John. You guys are such an incredible resource for NorCal up here.
All right.
Thank you so much.
For sure. Thank you guys all for your time.